That summer travel bookings have soared over the past month, with the top three destinations being Orlando, New York, and London topping the list. Industry watchers say the easing of COVID requirements for entry into and exit from many countries is one factor. Another is cost. The same travel site finds that the average summer airfare for 2022 is 53% lower than in 2019. Jim Ryan, ABC News.
This weekend, the latest incarnation of Batman swings into theaters, and star Robert Pattinson says, along with months of fight training, getting ready for the role meant
reading probably 1 trillion Batman graphic novels.
Fans may get a little shock reading their ticket prices. However, theater giant AMC is using a surge pricing idea for the Batman tickets for the first weeks that it's out. This is ABC News.
Now an important message from Exergen. A critical new FDA study proves that the widely used non-contact thermometers are not accurate and have high probabilities for false negative readings. New COVID strands are on the rise, and non-contact manufacturers are being irresponsible at a time when accuracy matters most. Accurate temperature measurements are essential. Don't wait. Switch to Exergen because they are accurate and backed by over 100 clinical studies. Be sure, be accurate with Exergen. Learn more at Exergen.com.
I'm Sherry Preston, ABC News.
Our unseasonably warm weather pattern continues again today, but it comes to a halt briefly tomorrow, and then we'll resume the warming into the weekend. Mostly sunny and breezy. Our highs upper 70s to low 80s. We do have a weak cool front coming in tonight that will not bring any rain. It will bring cooler weather, though. Low to mid 40s for the lows. Tomorrow is mostly sunny, noticeably cooler. Highs in the mid 50s to about 60. We do expect warming for the weekend. I'm Mike Mays in the North Carolina News Network Weather Center.
It has risen about 8 degrees since 30 minutes ago. It's now 60, and it's jumping all the way up to about 75, 76 today on a beautiful sunny sky. You'd think it was springtime already because the allergies are already popping out, and folks are sneezing, snorting all the way around the area, but we got to live through that as well. It's 9:05. This is WCAB Rutherford, serving the foothills of the Carolinas. Getting some calls again about how that interview can be heard again. You can go to our website, www.wcab59.com, and click on listen again. It may not be up just yet, but in about a few minutes, just run it on down by till about this time, 8:30 time, and it should be there. And now it's time to make room for this next exciting program.
It's time now for My Great America with Jim and Butch, a conversation about positive things about this great country. And now here are Jim and Butch.
Well, good morning, Butch.
Good morning, Jim. You have had a full, fruitful, and very productive morning. That was a great interview with Virginia Fox on the front lines representing this region up in Washington, D.C., and then also with Joel live from the Ukraine.
Oh, that was exciting. I appreciate him doing that.
You know, it was great to get we love to get front lines information because we know that there's such a bias towards distortion on all sides of issues. So to hear from people right on the front lines, be able to penetrate the veil of a lot of what happens on social media, misinformation, disinformation. I also want to commend the organization. You asked that great question, how can people get involved? And he mentioned One Challenge, www.onechallenge.org. I'm very familiar with this organization. A lot of people may not remember that I moved from Colorado Springs. Colorado Springs has 163 different ministries right there on the Front Range. It's a ministry-dense area, and one of those ministries is the organization that he commended, onechallenge.org. So I want to personally recommend them. I'm actually personally familiar with their president, Dr. Dean Carlson, who's right there in Colorado Springs, and one of their key board members is a retired Compassion International executive. Compassion, of course, is a major child sponsorship organization, and they were a client of my company, Touchpoint Solutions, a strategic consulting firm there. And I learned only because I looked at the website this morning that a dear friend of mine I've been out of touch with for years is actually on their board. And more so, Jim, he lives in Indian Trail, North Carolina. He's retired now. I have no idea where Indian Trail is.
That's over beyond Charlotte.
Okay.
Not too far.
Well, his name is
Charlotte.
Thayer Allison. So I just want to make sure that if you're interested in doing prayer, please pray for the people of Ukraine. But beyond that, faith without works is dead. It tells us in James. Go to their website. It's a global mission organization. One thing interesting about it is they work primarily with local churches in countries. So it's not just Americans coming with Jesus. It's working through local churches. It's to bring transformation to nations and communities. And some of the ways that they do that is through church planting, education, holistic ministry, leadership development, bridge building. They have a sports ministry as well as a business transformation ministry. And it just reminded me again that there are organizations that are out there doing great work. And so if you're interested and you were motivated by that interview, please pray, obviously, and then take the next step. Go to that website and do what you can.
That sounds like a great. I'm glad you brought that up because we don't know about a lot of those ministries that are out there, those organizations. So I'm glad you had first-hand knowledge of who they are, and you can give some validity to it.
Well, I want to commend them to you. They're also a member of the Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability, which is like the good housekeeping seal of approval to make sure that any dollar that you invest there. I've not been paid to say this. I have no direct relationship with them. But I do want to commend them to you as an organization doing really good work.
OneChallenge.org. That's ONE, OneChallenge.org.
Correct. Jim, just as an aside, this is what they call a non sequitur. It's in Latin. It's not directly related to what we're going to jump in and talk about. I realized again this morning that I'm getting older.
How's that?
You know how?
How?
Because I'm carrying around handkerchiefs. Jim, I bought a package of handkerchiefs recently. I don't ever remember doing that. And I have one tucked away in my Bible. I'm finding that when I go out the door, I was going to ask you, as my older brother, is this just inevitable? Does this just happen? Or?
Well, it could also be a stylish thing. Carrying handkerchiefs in your coat pocket is a stylish thing, but carrying a handkerchief around is a safety precaution because you never know. You might need one.
Well, I don't
see that as an aged thing.
Oh, okay. All right. Great.
Because I have one too.
Great. Well, I felt like I wanted to ask you because as my older brother, you can help me just know and navigate the things that are ahead. I just noticed I'm starting to carry around a handkerchief. My grandfather, I remember him. He had a bulbous nose, by the way, a bulbous nose. And when he would read Bible stories to us or pray and pray strong, he would reach for his handkerchief and he'd be wiping his forehead. So anyway, it was something I noticed this morning. I'm not going out the door without a handkerchief anymore.
Call on me anytime, young man.
Okay, Jim, I knew that there were going to be some encouraging words from you because that is you. You were a bright light of encouragement. Now, I want to give you a little history. This Ukrainian crisis comes kind of close to home because of a number of trips to that region of the world through my work. And then also we have a Russian-born daughter, Tatiana, that was on last week. And so my first trip to that area of the world was actually right after the fall of the Berlin Wall, which was November of 1989. And Americans are so quick in particular to forget their history. I wanted to quickly remind people of a series of events that took place. We remember that bold rhetorical statement from Ronald Reagan, Mr. Gorbachev, take down that wall. God had worked on the heart of Mikhail Gorbachev to the place where he saw that there were inevitabilities that were happening and that the impulse for democracy, the impulse for self-rule, the impulse against patriarchs and oligarchs and autocratic kings, God built that in us, Jim. That's why America was formed. You know, we're not going to have taxation with no representation. We're willing to take up arms to fight for our freedoms. Well, that's not just an American impulse. That's an impulse around the world. And it's one of the reasons why, as a nation, we have to be so circumspect to not let our freedoms erode, not let our republic disappear, not let democracy be diluted, Jim, because the world, I will tell you this, as somebody who's traveled to 104 countries, the world sees us as the flame and the fire of democracy, and they watch aghast and with disappointment when they see the United States watering down what they've come to long for. My first trip to the former Soviet Union, I wouldn't do this anymore, but I went with a bunch of jeans and traded them for lacquer, delicate, expensive lacquer boxes. Why? Because people wanted any vestige of anything American. They longed for what they believed America had, which was freedom, the right to be free, the right to worship, the right to start businesses. I was working for Pat Robertson when all of this happened, and right after the fall of the wall in Eastern Europe, November of 1989, he called me. We used to have, some of us had 2 phones on our desk. One phone was for outside calls, and the other phone, this is a little known fact, but I'm so many years removed from it, I can say it now. The second phone only had one person that was ever going to call you.
Pat Robertson.
Pat Robertson. It was straight from his office, and there were about a dozen of us, and when that light would blink, it had a little light on it. It was like you were getting a call from the president. When that would blink, you knew it was Barbara Johnson, his executive assistant, saying Pat would like to speak with you. And you'd pick up the phone. Well, soon after the fall of the wall, the Berlin Wall, in November of 1989, I got one of those blinking lights and the call, and he said, he would say, brother, I want you to go to Eastern and Central Europe, and I want you to recruit, I want you to find 100 graduate students that can come to Regent University. And that was it. That was the assignment. So I went and got the corporate American Express card and got some convertible cash, different currencies, and with no contacts, Jim, parachuted into Eastern and Central Europe, Russia, and was there for about 6 weeks just meeting with people, networking with people. And less than a year from that, we didn't have 100 students. We had 89 students that we got local churches to sponsor. And they came and went into the programs of education and business. We even had a few that wanted to pursue certificates in law. So I was in that region of the world a lot starting about then. I was actually there when tanks went to the Russian White House. So it's an area, I'm not pretending to be an expert, but it's an area where I've got some background. Sure. I've traveled all over Russia, and a lot of people don't realize that with the dissolving of the former Soviet Union, you had a lot of these countries that were in the Balkans and Eastern and Central Europe that broke up and found their own fledgling democracies. Well, Ukraine was one of those. And Ukraine has a rich history, including, we mentioned before, of despair with the former Soviet Union. In the early 30s, as we mentioned, Stalin actually oversaw a tremendous famine that killed millions of people in Ukraine. So the older Ukrainians, and even the ones who are not so old, who remember what it was like to be under forced learning, for example, of the Russian language. All of the former satellite countries, they forced them to learn Russian, even though they had ethnic differences and the like. So the history there is rich, and it's deep, and it's wide.
One of the world's largest grain exporters comes out of Ukraine, so that'll affect a lot of people around the world.
Right, and you also have a very strong IT backbone in Ukraine. What's so interesting is a lot of Western countries around the world have depended on Ukrainian computer experts. Now, some of those are like their own digital Black Robe Regiment, and they're forming little enclaves to do cyber war against Russia, and we've seen in the news some of the things that's been done there. But it's the world's largest country. Mm-hmm. We need to remember that. We're 3 time zones. It actually occupies 10% of all the land on Earth. A tenth of all the land on Earth. We're 3 time zones. They're 11. Wow. I've been to Vladivostok, which is the eastern part of the former Soviet Union. That's where they've got their fleet in that part of the world. All the way to Moscow, that's 11 hours that there. It has shores on 3 oceans, the Atlantic, Pacific, and the Arctic Ocean. And the Russian landscape varies from sandy and frozen deserts, tall mountains, and giant marshes. It's got everything that you could look for. I remember once being with a small group of people in Yakutia, which is north of the Arctic Circle. The permafrost was so dense and deep, you couldn't put any piping underground, so all of the piping was up above the city. It was a very surreal kind of look. It was an animistic religion. They were almost like Eskimos in their features, and you would see in the trees strips of cloth that would be all through the trees, and these were prayers that they had put, that they believed the wind would come through the trees and carry the prayers up to the many gods that were there. I was there trying to help organize one of the first Bible distribution efforts in Yakutia, where people were going to get God's Word for the first time, and had a number of interactions with the Bible Society of Moscow, the Bible Society of Russia. I remember in Ukraine having the opportunity to go to a children's hospital where sadly there were a number of children on this one ward that had cancers that were the result of exposure to the radiation from the Chernobyl disaster. So it's a region of the world that needs Jesus. It's a region of the world that's involved in what we believe is a very significant event, even in terms of biblical prophecy. And we're not going to go into that in too much length, except to say some people that are involved in the study of eschatology will refer to Gog and Magog as being that part of the world, Russia and Ukraine included. So we know God has a timetable. God's not surprised. We also know that in the midst of all of this, Jim, Putin's motives are not clear. And the people I talk to that are at places like the Heritage Foundation or the Brookings Institute say that even Russian scholars in this country were very caught by surprise at what he did. I mean, just the ferocity of everything. And when ego becomes involved, Scripture makes this very clear. In kings and leaders, you've got problems that are on the way, to be sure.
That's happened throughout biblical history, and those things got in the way of leadership. What is the major religion over in Ukraine?
Well, you're going to have Russian Orthodox. You're going to have Eastern Orthodox. Now, what's interesting is that you have a bifurcation or a separation in the Orthodox Church where you have this ecclesiastical hierarchy and you have different people leading different parts of what you would call the Orthodox Church. The Orthodox Church in Russia has some allegiances to Putin, and there are Eastern Orthodox in Ukraine who obviously don't feel the same way. Religion in Russia in particular has been used as a political tool. I mean, a lot of the missionaries that came into the former Soviet Union had to deal with an Orthodox church, a Russian Orthodox church, that did not like people hearing the gospel and becoming born again. Why? Because they lost control of them. And so whether it's the Greek Orthodox, the Eastern Orthodox, the Russian Orthodox, Armenian Orthodox, the Orthodox Church, and I'm not saying this in a disparaging kind of way, really reflects a false kind of religion in so many respects, and they are very much a bedfellow, if you will, with Putin on all of this. You can be certain that Putin has said to them, I need your help in spiritually legitimizing what I'm doing. And that's why you have Putin making statements with all of his dark operatives that there were humanitarian things going on, ethnic Russians were being murdered in the former, in Ukraine. That's why he justified going into those two republics to say, I'm trying to protect ethnic Russians who feel a kinship with the motherland and are being killed or being disparaged against or prejudiced against. A lot of that misinformation had been going on for a while.
Joel mentioned that one of the things he does over there is train missionaries in that area of Ukraine, and he's been there several years. Something you mentioned a while ago, you mentioned Ronald Reagan. There's a comparison that I thought was interesting between Ronald Reagan and President Zelensky. Both of them actors in their background have come to be great leaders as presidents of countries. And Zelensky was an actor and a stand-up comedian at one time.
Well, it proves again, Jim, that God takes the foolish things to confound the seemingly wise, and God is going to use any instrument. If we have a yielded heart, if we're committed to Him, if we obey, repent when we miss it, God is going to use any of us in kingdom purposes. Now, one of the big misperceptions that Putin had, Jim, is he thought that the Ukrainian people were just going to roll over and say, come on in, we're just not ready to fight. Do you know the most recent data showed that 44% of Ukrainians just a few months ago couldn't even afford their utility bills? But now we're talking about grandmas and grandpas and teachers and attorneys and artists and people that work in restaurants saying, just remind me how to use an AK-47 again. And it's inspiring because it is so American.
Yes, it is.
But the America we used to be, Jim, and that we still are if we'll stir the fires. Now, Putin's long-term strategy, I'll just say this, not as somebody who's skilled politically in that area, but understanding some of the geopolitical realities. Putin's long-term strategy is not going to work if the Ukrainians, with outside support, continue to fight back. And, it will become, in the cities, guerrilla warfare, urban kind of warfare, and it's a home game, if you will, for the Ukrainians. They know where the nooks and crannies are. It's like when the British came. The British came with their beautiful red coat outfits and their new pristine muskets and thought that they were still fighting sort of the you face me and I face you and we shoot and see who's gonna die and who's gonna kill more people. People like the Swamp Box and others, our commandos that were here in the United States said, no, we're going to come out of the swamps. We're going to come out of bushes that you don't know about, and caves that you've never seen before. And in like manner, a lot of military assessors from our country say that the longer this goes on, that's why there's this blitzkrieg. That was the term that Hitler popularized, if you will, with the Junkers bombers that went into Poland and other places to get in quick and be decisive. But the longer it goes on, the less it bodes well for the Soviet Union. Most Russians didn't want it to happen. In December 2021, there was reliable survey data that came out of Russia saying that less than 8% of Russians thought the country should send military forces to fight the Ukrainian government. That means 92% according to the most recent data that we have, and only 6% thought Russia should approach the West as an enemy. Now, with that, 75% of Russians believe that NATO is a risk to them. And because most Americans don't have a passport and haven't traveled, they don't realize how close all of Europe is. And so, not to play the devil's advocate, because we don't do that, Russia is concerned because they're watching the democratization of all these countries that used to be under their umbrella. And those aren't countries an ocean away. Those are countries 30 minutes away and right on their border. And so the saber rattling with places like Finland and Sweden and the former Baltic countries, Eastern and Central European countries, is because Putin knows that politically he has forces that are trying to take him out in Russia. And it's almost axiomatic around the world that when a country is in a war, it doesn't feel like a good time to the people to switch leaders. And the more Putin can define this as we got people with black hats on and white hats on, and I'm going to help defend the Russian people, he believes there's an outside chance that people will follow him in that path, which is really dangerous.
Yeah, I've read something, I wish I could remember the number, for some Russian businessman was offering millions of dollars for somebody to go in there and actually assassinate Putin, because they don't like what he's doing,
right,
as a general rule.
Right, and the most recent estimates are that there have been over 7,000 people in 51 cities that have been arrested because of their anti-government, anti-Putin, anti-Ukraine action that has taken place there. So the long-term effects of the sanctions are still unclear based on some of my interaction with people who are economists. When you freeze assets, when you make it difficult for people to have any financial transactions, when you cut off some of the major revenue supplies, which of course is oil, but also minerals. They have cobalt, they have uranium, they have a lot of other, it's a rich natural resources country. But when that happens, what ends up happening, sadly, is it ends up hurting the people. And it is so important that we remember, as the program is quickly ending here, it's so important that we ask God the question, what can we do? What can we do? We obviously need to pray in an environment where we said on the last program, only 11% of Americans pray every day. Less than 22% read their Bible every day. So when somebody asked me the question yesterday, where's God in all of this? Where are we?
Yeah.
We're not a praying country, and we're not reading God's Word. And yet we're expecting the God of the universe to hear our prayers in the middle of a difficulty. It doesn't work that way. I don't care if you're Baptist or go to Word of Faith Fellowship. It does not work this way, where, God, I'm not going to read your word. I really don't care about your plan. And, oh, by the way, I'm too busy to talk to you. It just doesn't work, Jim. And we don't have time for me to go on that, not tirade, but prophetically, just a strong sense of don't say you're going to pray if you're not going to pray. Yeah. That's why when people say to me, I'll pray for you, in my heart, I'll say, Jesus, let that be real. Yeah. So what can we do? The first thing is we've got to distinguish between Putin and the Russians. We can't take this out on the Russian people. Okay, they have little say except to protest, which is what they're doing. The second is donate to help the refugees in the region. For example, places like Moldova, they're not rich countries. They've got a huge influx that's coming. And so find countries and organizations, groups like World Vision, World Relief, this organization that Joel mentioned this morning, help in that way. Be willing to pay higher gas prices. I know people hate that, but the reality is the sanctions are not going to hurt Russia unless they hurt at home. And so we got to be willing to do that. And then we need to have relationships with your local representatives. That's, Jim, why it's so important that you keep such a great relationship with people like Virginia Fox. Yeah, to hear on the front lines what's happening there and to let them know that we care. So pray, be involved. Make sure you pray, too, for the Russian people. Having been there a lot, it is a nation that is not as strong. I mean, it does have 6,000 nuclear warheads and a crazy leader. But like it says in 2 Timothy, I think it is 1:7 or 17, God hasn't given us a spirit of fear. We're not called to be fearful in the midst of all of this, but we are called to get off the sidelines.
I remember in the story there was a big giant named Goliath and a little shepherd boy, and how that story ended.
Yeah, and when I was young, we used to sing a song, Only a Boy Named David. Only a young king, only a boy named David, but he could pray and sing. Only a boy named David, only a rippling brook, only a boy named David, but 3 little stones he took. Or was it 5? Forgive me. 3 little stones he took, and 1 little stone went through the air. And I mean, I remember as a young boy singing that and thinking, whatever Goliaths come into my life, God, give me the faith that he had. And we sing a song at our church that talks about the fact that he sings a song. We sing a song where it talks about the fact that God killed the lion, God killed the bear, God opened the Red Sea. So we've got to look back on the times God's been faithful, but get on our knees, stand with our Ukrainian brothers and sisters, and remember, God is in control. There's nothing that takes him by surprise. The strength of a nation is not based on indifference. The strength of a nation like America with its history is based on its willingness to get in the fight. Loyalty is never so regarded as in those moments when betrayal rears its ugly head. We cannot betray the democracy-loving people of Ukraine, Jim. And so we can do our part here in Rutherford County.
Absolutely. I'll see you next week.
See you next week.
God bless America.
God bless America.
Thank you for joining us for My Great America with Jim and Butch. Join us each Tuesday and Thursday morning at 9:05 for this enlightening program on 100.9 FM and 590 AM. It's My Great America with Jim and Butch.